Chapter 10. Lily. I'll pay you 50 gold coins for it. The young man who had been eyeing the eternal hourglass finally stepped in front of Lily's stall. In his hand he held a bag of coins, presumably 50 of them. Lily made a show of eyeing the bag, then the hourglass. The man stared at her, ignoring the murmurs of the crowd. Lily counted down in her head, waiting. Sure enough, another man in his this one significantly more marked by time, stepped in and raised a bag of coins that was presumably heavier. 60, he said. And so it starts. Lily was glad for her shawl, for it hid her devious smile. She loved bartering, but more than that, she loved watching customers argue amongst themselves. It was even more amusing when they fought over useless magic like the hourglass. When she and Kadir had first found the relic in a den of ghouls, she had thought it might reverse time or perhaps slow it down. No, Kadir had said in response to her speculation. It just endlessly reveals. We battled our way through a horde of ghouls for this. It's worthless. Kadir had just raised his brow and said, You should know by now that magic will sell simply because it is magic. He was right. The bid was finalized at 120 coins. The hourglass was the last thing she sold that night. Now that she'd met her personal quota, she was eager to see if she could catch one of old Ruba's stories. If she was lucky, Yusuf would be there. You're smiling, Kadir said wearily. She finished packing up the last of the relics and hefted the bag of infinite space over her shoulder. Aren't you excited to hear the stories of Dahab? Kadir snorted. Hardly. You humans make up the most ridiculous tall tales. What do you expect us to do? It's not as if any of us have been there. Luli kept her eyes out for Rasul as they walked through the souk. She was curious about his merchandise. And, she added pointedly, you won't tell me anything about it. Kadir shrugged. I'm no storyteller. She rolled her eyes. Kalam freak. You don't need to buy a storyteller to tell me about your home. Tahab was another one of Kadir's many secrets. He never went into any detail about it. It had taken him long enough to tell her he was from the great Jinn city. You want to know more about Tahab? It has sand and sun and Jinn. Luli smiled. She couldn't help it. Oh, I feel so enlightened. As you should be. Kadir looked dangerously close to a smile himself. They turned down a bend in the pathway and came into the heart of the souk, where the most experienced merchants sold their goods. Luli knew most of the people by name and had bartered with them before, offering magic for tools. This was where she had acquired Kadir's samshir, trading a relic, a glass filled with fire that sparked to life at a single touch, for the blade. She eyed the smith's shop in passing, noting the array of swords and knives hanging on the mounted wooden boards. The dagger Kadir had given her was not nearly as ornate as any of the weapons on that display, but she could not imagine replacing it. Her hand went to the hidden pocket in her robe, where she could feel the shape of the enhanced blade. Small but lethal, she thought, and then she remembered her encounter with the shadow Jinn and grimaced. The next time she was in a fight, she would make sure she did not lose. The two of them had still not found Rasul as they approached the outskirts, but Luli was unconcerned. There would be more opportunities to find him before they left for the desert. For tonight, she was done with the souk. She was approaching the entrance when she heard the shouts, the same call rising and rising in a panicked crescendo that made her vision darken with fear. Rat! They cried. Rat in the souk! Someone had revealed the location of the market to the Sultan's guard. The alarm went up at once, crashing through the market like a tidal wave. From there, the pandemonium swelled. Luli heard the hiss of metal and the fleeing footsteps of merchants and customers. They came in droves, pushing her in too many directions at once. Someone stepped on her foot hard, and she nearly toppled. Kadir grabbed her before she hit the ground. We need to move. His voice was soft but firm, an anchor in the chaos. Luli sharpened her fear into a plan. There were many entrances to the souk. If these were the Sultan's men, they had likely come from an entrance closer to the noble quarter. We leave the way we came, she said. Kadir nodded. He took the lead so that to shield her against the surging crowds. which grew more frantic by the moment. Luli spotted one of the Sultan's men amidst the chaos, struggling to capture a woman in dark blue robes. He just grabbed her arm when a man rushed him from behind and knocked him to the ground. "Get off my wife!" The woman screamed as her husband grappled with the guard. And then, the glimmer of a sword, a slash of crimson. The husband fell, gripping an injured arm. The guard regained his footing, holding a sword dripping with the man's blood. He turned and caught her gaze. His eyes widened, but before he could say anything, Kadir rammed an elbow into his head and knocked him unconscious. Luli stumbled back. "They're looking for me." She knew it with certainty then, knew it was the reason they had tried to capture the woman in blue. "They have secured the area," Kadir pointed, and Luli followed his gesture to the entrance they had come from. Guards had already congregated, blocking the way out. "What's your plan, Luli?" She pressed a fist into her forehead. "Think. You've gotten out of scuffles with ghouls, with jinn. Think." But with jinn and ghouls, she could resolve her problem with a blade. In this situation, there were repercussions for assault. A call rose from the center of the souk, not far from where they were standing. "Midnight Merchant, the Sultan summons you." The voice had a deep booming quality of thunder. "Step forward, or we shall burn this place and everyone in it to the ground." Everyone was looking at her now. An older man lurched forward to grab her, but Kadir shoved him back before he could touch her. He looked at her expectantly, urgently. She knew that if she commanded him to find a way out, he would. He would burn a path if it was necessary. But then what? She could not run for long. This was the Sultan's city. She squeezed her eyes shut. The people around her knew the dangers of illegal market. She had no reason to give herself up for any of them, and yet, "I will not let anyone die for me." Luli, this close, Kadir's eyes shimmered gold as if a fire had ignited in them. She tapped the knife hidden in her pocket. "Find me." Kadir hesitated. When he glanced at the bag on her shoulder, she shook her head and mouthed the word insurance. She was not the midnight merchant without her relics, after all. The two of them looked at each other for a long moment before the threat came again. Slowly, Kadir retreated into the crowds. Luli took a deep breath and continued forward. The crowds parted without a command. The Sultan's guards stood at the center of the souk in a half circle, with Dahlia bint Adnan in the middle. Despite the fact that her shawl was in tatters and her long black hair was in disarray, she still looked every inch the proud tavern keeper. She appeared just as surprised to see Luli as Luli was to see her. For a few moments the two stared at each other. Then quietly Dahlia pressed her lips together and stepped aside. Luli approached the guards, hands raised. "You wanted to see me?" In an effort to keep herself from fighting back as they pulled the bag of infinite space off her shoulder and shackled her hands behind her. The raid leader, the man with the booming voice, watched the proceedings stoically. Luli glared at him. "So this is how the Sultan treats those he summons?" He laughed. "I can assure you he has nothing but the utmost respect for you, midnight merchant. If he did not, you and all your criminal friends would already be burned to cinders." He turned and barked orders to his men. When the way was cleared, the guards led Luli back through the crowds and up toward the moonlit world. She cast one final look back at Dahlia. Tavern keeper put a hand to her chest and bowed. "Good luck," she mouthed. Luli held tight to those words, useless as they were. Blessedly, the souk above ground was empty. The lanterns snuffed out, which meant there were barely any citizens around to witness her public humiliation. Every once in a while shutters snapped open and people peered through the windows at her. When they did, Luli made sure they saw her with her head held high. She was the only woman in a sea of men, and she did not intend to look frail or pathetic. Never mind that she felt frail and pathetic. They led her through the streets to the Sultan's palace, which, at this time of night, glowed with wraith-like quality, the red roses winding up the walls resembling bloody wounds. The courtyard inside was just as beautiful and terrible. Luli felt ill as she gazed upon the unnatural white roses and the trees heavy with fruit, knowing that they had borne of jinn blood. Everywhere she looked, she saw excessive finery, sconces shaped like sunflowers, a fountain of twirling glass dancers, a garden hedged in by towering topiaries. She was filled with disgust. How many jinn were killed to make this immortal garden? They led her to a set of elaborate double doors where a dozen soldiers crowded the corridor, yelling at each other while a bearded man in a turban, no doubt the Cade, barked orders. What are you, cowards? We do not need the prince's thieves. Get in there! The Jinn will kill us before we even raise our swords. What of Prince Mazin? Luli stared at the doors, perplexed. A Jinn? No. The raid leader strode ahead and demanded an explanation. Apparently, Prince Mazin had been possessed by a Jinn and was wreaking havoc in the Diwan. None of the guests could escape, and every soldier who entered had yet to return. Luli's mind whirled with speculation. Was it the Shadow Jinn? Was the hunter the Jinn had been searching for here? Was it Omar? She cleared her throat. Excuse me. The Cade and the raid leader paused to look at her. Midnight merchant, the Cade said coolly. He glanced at the soldier beside her, at the bag of infinite space he carried. The moment he reached for it, Luli instinctively stepped in front of him. Keep your hands off my bag. If you use my relics without paying for them, she glowered at him, you will be cursed to a slow and painful death. The Cade unceremoniously shoved her out of the way. Luli whirled to face him as the guards grabbed her from behind. Try it, why don't you? I'm the only one who knows how to use the magic in that bag. I alone can use those relics to save your sultan and his sons. She cringed when the Cade gave her a hard look. She was a damned fool. The sultan had nearly burned down a market to capture her, and now she was going to help him? But Medine would collapse without him, and Medine was still home. Besides, this would force the sultan into her debt. The Cade relented, but the guards kept their weapons out and in sight as they unbound her hands. She reached into her bag to withdraw the orb, which she would need to navigate the darkness, then slid Kadir's knife from her pocket and headed for the doors. The night had gone deadly quiet, and the only sound was the tapping of her pointed slippers on the floor. At the doors, she faltered, wondering if she could do this without Kadir. Last time she had nearly suffocated to death. She shook the thought from her head. This time, things will be different. This time, I'm ready. She gripped her knife and stepped back into the dark.